with green sheets. I don't know if people have the green sheets, but if not, we'll pause a second for people to get them. And the link was sent out twice before the high holidays. So if you're at home and you want to follow this text study as well, click on that link. Okay. So, first of all, Shana Tova. And I forgot to say this yesterday, so I'll say it now. I did say it the first night of Rosh Hashanah. I said it last night. It's a bit, it's amazing, but in all the time that I've been here, it's apparently never rained on Toshlet Day before. And so it never occurred to me to think what happens if it rains, okay? But it's been raining pretty heavily, and there's a hill there, and I'm thinking that even if it happens not to be raining at 5:45, nobody wants to go down that hill. I mean, my dog would probably love it, right? Because dogs love to play in the mud, right? But whatever. So we will not have Toshlet, which means that we will not have the rest of the service at the lake after Toshlet. So instead of going to the lake at 5:45, come here at 6:15. Okay, we'll have afternoon service for the second day. We'll have minions, so there won't be any minion online tonight. And I just, I can see, the gears in everybody's heads. So if I don't say Toshlet today, what happens? Right? If I don't say Toshlet today, right? I mean, you're all very worried. So here's the good news. You can actually say Toshlet until Hoshana Rabbah, which is the last day of the Sukkot. So you've got over 2 weeks to get it in. Okay, so find yourself a natural body of water. Find yourself some breadcrumbs. If you don't have the Toshlet service, send me an email. I'll send you a link to the service. You can do Toshlet on your own. Okay, so it's not. I have to say, it's not very often that a problem arises that I can solve so easily. Okay, so I'm grateful for that opportunity. All right, so we're going to look and we'll see how it goes. I have 2 texts. We may not get to the second text. To me, frankly, the first one is more interesting, which is maybe why I put it first. This is a poem by Yehuda Amichai. Okay, and Yehuda Amichai passed away around the year 2000. He was really, I mean, if you had to ask, Israelis, let's say my age or a little younger or a little older, who is contemporary Israel's like national poet, greatest poet? No question. Everybody would say Yehuda Amichai. Okay, he was born in 1924 in Germany. When he was born in 1924 in Germany, his name was not Yehuda Amichai, it was Ludwig Hofer. But he made Aliyah with his family around 1936. The name Amichai, Yehuda probably was his Hebrew name all along, but Amichai means what? Right, my nation, my people lives, my nation lives, right? Which I'm going to guess is probably adopted on after the show. He grew up Orthodox, had a very strong Jewish education. He became known as secular because in Israel, especially in his era, that was the dichotomy. But his poetry really often dealt with deeply Jewish, biblical, religious themes, and he was in many ways the poet of protest against God. Okay, and I think actually protesting against God is a deeply religious impulse, right? When we look at the world and we say, you, God, gave us a vision of how the world should be, and I don't know about you, God, but I look around and I see that the vision of how it should be ain't exactly the way it is, right? And I hold you at least partially responsible, right? So anyway, so this poem is called The Real Hero, and I'm going to read it, and I'm going to just ask what you think about it, and then I'm going to throw out something and ask if that changes the way you view the poem. Okay. The real hero of the Isaac story was the ram, who didn't know about the conspiracy between the others, as if he had volunteered to die instead of Isaac. I want to sing a song in his memory about his curly wool and his human eyes, about the horns that were silent on his living head, and how they made those horns into shofars when he was slaughtered to sound their battle cries or to blare out their obscene joy. I want to remember the last frame, like a photo in an elegant fashion magazine, the young man tanned and manicured in his jazzy suit, and beside him the angel dressed for a party in a long silk gown. Both of them empty-eyed, looking at two empty places. And behind them, like a colored backdrop, the ram, caught in the thicket before the slaughter. The thicket was his last friend. The angel went home. Isaac went home. Abraham and God had gone long before. But the real hero of the Isaac story was the ram. Thoughts?
I disagree.
Huh?
I have to disagree.
Okay, so Howard, stand up so everybody can hear you.
Well, it said the thicket was his friend, is one part, but there was also its enemy.
Right, the thicket was his friend, according to the poem, but it was his enemy as well, right?
Entangled him. And the ram, if you can give it human structure, was not there by choice.
The ram was not there by choice, right?
Yeah, that's.
Right, sure. No, he was not a volunteer, he was volunteered, right? Right, and in Hebrew, I mean, because in Hebrew, like the way verb tenses work, so hitnader means he volunteered. Nudav means he was, but right? So we say keep nudav, right? He was volunteered, right? He did not volunteer. He was not a volunteer. Right, absolutely. Anyone else?
You're the victim.
He was a victim, right? He was a victim, right? But on the other hand, I mean, who do we view as the hero? Right? We view as the hero either Abraham or Isaac, right? But without the ram, it's a very different story, right? Without the ram, it's a very different story. And there, look, there's not million, okay, but many midrashim on this, okay, including, like, there's one part, right, where Abraham says to Isaac, right, God will show us a ram for the sacrifice Isaac, right? And God says to Abraham, sacrifice Isaac, right? And guess what? Guess what the ram's name was? Isaac, right? How could we, right? So Abraham didn't lie to the other Isaac, and he followed God's commandment to sacrifice Isaac, because the ram's name was also Isaac. Okay, now that's a midrash, right? All right, I don't want to get too into it because I want to hear more thoughts on the phone. Yeah, Joe.
I thought the third to bottom line was interesting. Abraham and God were going along before. I mean, Abraham is here physically until he can, right?
Right.
This makes maybe at least more than being gone.
Being God morally, or right, or look, for Amichai, God was long gone, right? I mean, for Amichai, when I said he was the poet of protest against, he was also in many ways the poet of the absence of God, right? In fact, that's actually a more accurate description. I mean, Amichai wrote many poems about a world that is absent of God, right? Or he wrote a take on El Malay Rachamim, right? And it's really hard to understand because there's a lot of Hebrew poets, El Malay, Il Malay. Il Malay means if it were not, okay? But he writes El Malay Rachamim, which means God full of mercy, right? And he writes, I don't remember the exact, but he writes, yes, God is full of mercy, and because God is so full of mercy, there's no mercy left to be in the world, right? So God has all the mercy, and there's no mercy in the world, okay? Which means pretty hard, right? But look, if you lost all of your family in the Holocaust, right? I mean, I'll tell you a personal story. I have, you know, like many of us, we have relatives, probably most of them gone now, who were Holocaust survivors, right? And I had a conversation with you know, one of these relatives that you don't know exactly how they're related, right? But they're a relative, right? And she lived in Israel, and you know, and I was studying for the rabbinate, and she says to me, because she didn't speak English, and I didn't speak Yiddish, and actually her Hebrew wasn't that great, so, but even though she lived in Israel a long time, and she said to me, "Shehayiti b'machaneh," right, when I was in the concentration camp, Marty, I said, "Ain't no," right? There's no God, right? And look, there are people who survived with their faith intact, but there are people who lost their faith. And in my opinion, which one is right? Both of them, right? I do not judge somebody who went through that, right? I do not judge. But so for like God had gone 40 years early, right? And probably Abraham with him because Abraham was willing to do something that Amichai thought was immoral, Like, yeah, Mike.
So as a traditionalist, a naive traditionalist, it has to be said, God was the hero of this story, because God tested Abraham, but in the final analysis, God provided the land. Isaac was never in real danger, and they all lived happily ever after. Well, the ram not, but the ram was put there by God as a replacement, so.
Right, but the ram, I mean, and I don't know, I honestly don't know if Amichai was a vegetarian, right? No, it would matter, because if Amichai was a vegetarian, then Amichai would say to you, the ram was just as much a victim as Isaac would have, right? I mean, it's an interesting biographical fact of which I'm unaware. Okay, so I'm gonna tell you, yeah.
There's a theme here that the victim is used by society.
The theme here that the victim is used by society, absolutely, okay? And let me tell you when this poem was written. Okay, this poem was written in 1983. Okay? I don't know how many people know enough Israeli history to understand the significance of this poem written in 1983, yeah? Well, but after the Lebanon War, right? After the Lebanon War, and most interpreters who've written on this poem say that the ram is all of the kids who died in the Lebanon War. Right? The ram is all the kids who died in the Lebanon War. Now, is it so? I don't know. Right? I have no idea. And Amichai is not around, so we can't ask him, but I will tell you, and I'm going to wrap up with this actually, because this is, this has been a good discussion. That's why Amichai is so great. You could have such good discussions, right? And I had the privilege of being taught by Amichai, one class, okay? I was fortunate enough in rabbinical school that there were only a handful of us, because our program was programmed for American students in Jerusalem, and there were only a handful of us who really knew Hebrew well enough to function at that level, but our professor was a man by the name of Tet Carney, who was a well-known Israeli poet, okay, but not, on the level of renown as Yehuda Amichai, but Carney and Amichai were friends, okay, and on the day we studied some Amichai poetry, lo and behold, we walk into the classroom, there's 8 of us, and Professor Carney, and Amichai, right? So, I mean, it's a little bit, to try to interpret Amichai's poems while Amichai is sitting here, right? But, so one of my classmates says, I don't remember what he said, but he says, and that's what I think this poem means. And then he turns to Amichai and he says, is that right? Ha'im ze nachon? And Amichai says, lo mishneh. It doesn't matter, okay? It does not matter what I intended. If you see it in the poem, it's there, right? Once I write the poem and put it out there, it no longer belongs to me, right? And if you see it in the poem, it's there, okay? And I mean, in terms of my approach to understanding scripture, right? I mean, I may have had no more important line said to me in my life, right? Because, right, what do the sages say? Shivim panim la Torah, right? There's 70 faces to the Torah. Okay, but in biblical, 70 just means a lot, right? So if I say, what does this line in the Torah mean? And you say, I think it means blah, 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 and I can't say you know it doesn't. I can say to you, that's not the way I read it, right? Or consider that maybe it actually means, right? And God, right? We have all these stories in the Talmud. God, there are stories in the Talmud where the rabbis interpret something, and God essentially said, that's not what I meant, right? And the rabbi said, what? You said this the other night. Lo Hashamayim, right? It's not in heaven, okay? Right? Like, they couldn't put it up, right? Once I write it and put it out there, it doesn't belong to me. It belongs to you as much as it belongs to me. And if you see it in there, it's in me, right? Having said that, Lloyd, I think you win the morning for sure, because I think that that's exactly what, you know, that the victim is victimized by society, right? And you know, how to divorce, right? Well-educated men in offices decide that other people are gonna die, right? And that's, you know, I mean, whether it's Isaac, whether it's the ram, right? I mean, it was never Abraham and it was never God, right? So for Amichai, again, Abraham and God are long gone, right? They set the story in motion, but they're not the ones who are paying the price, right? All right. Let's get it right.
That's how most people suffer. The decisions made by people who walk away.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Right, and, you know, and, right, and what, I should be held accountable? Okay, let's, continue with the cottage before Musaf. Page 214, and then we'll say the